Welcome to Behind the Wines, a freshly bottled podcast about Australian wine, the wines we love, and the people behind them. My mission is simple. I want to get down into the cellar with sommeliers, stomp some grapes with winemakers, and have chats with our finest critics, growers, retailers, and chefs. Today, we're joined by one of the most dynamic voices in Australian wine and hospitality, Liinaa Berry. From her roots in Mauritius to top wine bars of Melbourne and the vineyards of Europe, Liinaa's journey is one of passion, purpose, and transformation. She's not just a sommelier, but a writer, educator, consultant, and now a leading advocate for regenerative farming in the wine industry. So let's explore her incredible path, her vision for the future, and see how she's reshaping the wine conversation in Australia and around the world. Welcome to Behind the Wines, Liinaa.
Thanks for having me.
So you started your journey in Mauritius and arrived in Australia in 2006. What sparked your passion for wine?
I think it was obviously working in hospitality to pay my studies, but then I wanted to give meaning to what I was doing in hospo. So I was a bartender first. My experience working at the City Wine Shop, actually upstairs, Siglo, a few years of it's just open, so it was really in its heyday. And I remember I was making like 10 whiskey sours, 10 mojitos. It was super busy. There was like lots of people all the time. And then they were doing these wine training downstairs. And I asked if I could go to one of them, even though I was in more about cocktails at the time. And I do remember what really caught my attention was the words that the sommeliers or the wine professionals, and one of them said the wine was ethereal. I was like, what is even this word? And how do you use this word to describe a wine? And that triggered me. And also I'm very interested in language. In high school, I was in literature, French literature, English literature, and I've always been very big on reading books about, languages. And I speak 3 languages, being from Mauritius. So for me, it was about the beautiful lexicon that wine would bring up. And I wanted to understand that. I wanted to demystify that. But I also thought that there was something so classy and elegant and poetic about it. So this is what made me fall in love. I wanted to understand. And the second thing was tasting a Barolo for the first time. Because for me, I looked at the color of the wine. Nebbiolo, it's often that luminous sort of like maybe a little bit brick red, but it is not purple big like a Shiraz, right? So at the time, obviously, I didn't have much knowledge. I looked at the wine thinking it's going to be light, given its color. But when I tasted it, it was far from light. It was extremely complex. Whatever this tannic was, the tannins, the structure, even those like tertiary characteristic you can get with older Nebbiolos, it was all coming out. I was like, how does that even happen? So that is what got me obsessed.
You can see why the Italians call Barolo the king of wines.
Yeah.
So leaving Australia, you've explored over 35 wine regions in Europe. What's the one region that continues to surprise and inspire you?
Well, that is a tough question because it's like also what's your favorite wine? I mean, like there's quite a lot of them I'd say that are quite close to me and important to me because of like some of the relationship that I have with the vigneron. But to answer that today, I probably have to go to Austria because I am one of the unofficial ambassador of Austrian wines because I've been invited to go to the Vividum since 2016-17 and I go almost every year now to Austria. Last year, so I guess like Styria, it is a region in the south of Austria. It is on the border of Slovenia. So Styria is one of those regions that quietly rewired my thinking about wine. You arrive there, you see this rolling, almost alpine terrain, mist hanging over steep vineyards. And then you realize that the wines are shaped just as much by the landscape as much as by the people. And the thing about Styria, it's a bit of a well-kept secret because no one really thinks of like Styria. Okay, what's your favorite wine region? Someone's going to tell you Loire Valley. Someone's going to tell you Champagne. And probably I would have told you Champagne is my favorite thing to drink. But because at the moment I'm really going to regenerative farming and understanding, having a different narrative in wine, not speaking the same language, and just going into what are the innovations that's happening, whether it is technology or in the vineyard or this rise of consciousness with environmental factors. Styria is really the one that is, for me, really did for me. The soils are incredibly diverse. You have calcareous marl, and they call it so like calcareous marl, like opok, OPOK, and it actually brings a certain richness, but tension in the wine. And you've got limestone for purity, you've got lift, and then you've got a bit of volcanic soils that adds this depth and this mineral hum in all the wines. There's so much purity. For me, I find that region like really it's a patchwork of geology that speaks through the wine. For instance, they don't really put two main grape varieties that they work with is Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay, but they call it Morillon in the region. A lot of the times, they don't actually put the name of a grape variety on the label. It will be the name of the vineyard that it comes from, because they do not necessarily believe that there needs to be typicity. For them, it is a vineyard that is speaking in provenance. So think about that. We've always been raised to almost be dogmatic about the fact that wine has to have varietal typicity. You drink a Chardonnay because this is how a Chardonnay has to be. Okay, when I went to Styria, some of the producers there, when I was telling them that, they're like, yeah, but we don't want to replicate Burgundy. We don't want our Chardonnay to be reductive. We don't want it to be like a Meursault. We want it to be how it is here in the country. And that's okay, because Burgundy will always be Burgundy. Let them be Burgundy. And we have our own identity. And the fact that they're using like different Slavonian oak as well. And even that Sauvignon Blanc, away from like Loire, or even obviously definitely away from some of the Marlborough examples. In saying that, talking about Marlborough, I've been there recently and it's definitely a lot more than just grassy, passion fruity Sauvignon Blanc. There's some incredible Sauvignon Blanc being made there. But what I realize is really it is about like the expression of the soil. It is really a message. The bottle is a message that is speaking about where it's from. So whether it's a Chardonnay, whether it's a Sauvignon Blanc, and sometimes, you know what, you'd be drinking a wine and you'd be questioning, am I actually drinking a Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc? So this is what I thought like really quite fascinating with the region. So yeah.
I remember one of the most distinctive wines I had in a restaurant in Melbourne a long time ago now, and the restaurant doesn't even exist, was a Pinot Noir from Austria. And I thought, wow, this was just really elegant, different. And I was so surprised because I had never come across it before.
Yeah, there's a purity in the wine and there is an energy in the wine that I just thought like it's just so different from everywhere else that I've been. So I guess for me, this would be the wine region that is my favorite at the moment.
So I can really hear your passion. So how do you blend your philosophical outlook with your wine work? What's the connection between nature, humanity, and the vine?
Oh, that is a beautiful question. That is really a question that goes straight to my heart. You know, look, for me, wine is a metaphor for existence. It's shaped by, think about it, struggle. It's shaped by environment, by time. It's always evolving, just like we are. So the vine is a living being, entirely vulnerable to its surrounding. And the winemaker, well, they are not the author. For me, they're more like a translator or even a witness. So I have to tell you about my visit to Domaine Jacques Sellos in Aviz, because he had a way, he's a philosopher before anything. He has a way with words that really strike me. And I remember that I was the only one who spoke English and French. Everyone else in the tasting did not understand French and he did not want to speak English. And he knows how to speak English, but he could not be bothered. So I had to translate everything that he was saying. But he said something that I've never forgotten. It is when he talks about the vine being an antenna between the sky and the earth. And it struck me really deeply because what we're doing as humans is simply interpreting the signals nature is sending. We're not imposing, we're accompanying. And that is why, going back to your question of the connection between nature, humanity, and the vine, is that instead of imposing on nature, we should interpret nature, we should be observant. Hence why, the best vignerons, they are people that are watching, observing nature, knowing when it's going to rain. And then by observing, you become better at kind of maybe predicting, or you can accompany nature. You can actually interpret the message that nature is sending so that you could actually best do your work in terms of as a vigneron. So for me, it becomes someone who interprets those messages. And you cannot do that if you don't take the time to observe and to be fully in your environment, to sit in that vineyard, to smell the dirt, to, really feel the wind on your face, to understand that. And this is for me what, instead of making the wine, Anselm said to us, he does not make the wine because nature makes the wine. He's the obstetricien, the one that gives birth. Nature gives birth, he helps nature gives birth to the wine. That is what his role is. I found wow, so much humility. When he says he's assisting nature in giving birth to it, that image stayed with me, especially in Champagne, which is arguably probably the most technically manipulated wine style on earth. It reminded me that even in complexity, you have humility. That's why I've moved toward regenerative farming, because it's not about control or perfection, it's about deep observation. And that ties back to the question of vine and human. It's about building the kind of sensitivity that lets you feel what the soil needs, what the weather is telling you, what the vines are whispering. Great winemakers like Constancelos, they are not just skilled for me. They've developed almost like this sixth sense, a kind of fluency with the rhythm of the natural world. And for them to be able to interpret that and make a wine that is so beautiful, it is just like a blessing to be able to drink it. So I think that is the highlight, the epitome of where you can get as a human to be able to reach that level.
I can hear you're really passionate about regenerative farming. So what drew you to this movement?
I'm going to take you back to Styria again, okay? Just to tell you exactly that very moment, I was at Sattlerhof, Weingut Sattlerhof. They are one of the guys who are doing very much expression of terroir, not necessarily grape. It was this visit when I was actually with a group of friends from Australia, from Melbourne. They were doing a few wine regions in Central Europe. What happened is the time that I spent with the Sattlerhof family, that's when it cracked open for me something that is more than just wine. It's farming where we're talking about health and systems. I remember them explaining something that I find super fascinating. You can tell me what you think about it. Have you ever thought about like the microbiome of the soil having a reference to the gut bacteria we have as humans? When he started talking about that, I was like, yeah, wow. Because, you could go to all these visits. You know how many times you go to so many visits, and sometimes they do go into technical thing about chemistry and all that. And sometimes really, if you're a bit ADHD or sometimes you're just looking at the beautiful landscape, you might miss a few words. But then he was able to really capture, because, health is important to everyone. Right? And he was able to capture this, for me, this understanding of what was, because, I think people are often confused when you talk organic. What is organic versus biodynamic? What sustainability and these words are being tossed around, but do we really understand what they mean? Like even like regenerative farming, how is that different, So I remember them explaining the microbiome of the soil using the analogy of our own gut bacteria. The more diverse your diet is, the more resilient your gut flora is. And the same goes for soil. So he said how diversity is the strength. But just like we feed the wrong bacteria, for example, if you eat too much sugar, you're going to feed the wrong bacteria. And that is going to like outgrow the other good bacteria. And often this is the source of ailments, why we get sick. People try to understand why are we getting sick, but it's all coming from your gut bacteria. And diversity in what you eat is extremely important. So this is hence why we're talking about polyculture, in the way that you grow your vine, in the way that the diversity in the vineyard is what really will consolidate and really make your vine resilient. So what blew my mind most was hearing that they plant young vines with cover crops, for example. And even though conventionally you'd never do that, you'd avoid competition so the vine can establish quickly. What I realized is with regenerative farming, a lot of the things that are being taught, a lot of the things that they do are going against the grain of what has been learned in conventional winemaking. And it questioned the status quo. It turned everything all around, and it can cause a lot of confusion for people. It can also trigger resistance, generational resistance, because they've learned how to do things a certain way, and now you're telling them you can't do it that way. Not everyone is going to be happy with that. So when I was there, when I saw that this regenerative farming is the way of the future, it is the future of wine for me, because it is not about assessing the taste. Okay, this is 96-point score, 100-point score system. This is the assessment of the tannin, the balance of the wine. This is okay, that's a great thing, but what is the point of doing all of this if this is not leading to a more sustainable future? So we need to make people more aware of what you're drinking. When we talk about food, people are more tuned to what we're putting in our body because of what we're eating. Is it organic? Is this like free-range eggs or whatever? But what about what we drink? So this has been happening for a long time, but again, for it to actually reach the consumers, it's going to take longer and longer. And I guess this is why people like us, sommeliers, wine professional, wine writers, we are the purveyors. We are the purveyors of this. And I don't just walk around in a restaurant and sell wine. I have to actually carry a message. And this is how I see myself. So with this regenerative farming, the other one is when I went to New Zealand recently, I met Steve Smith, who was the first viticulturist to be a master of wine. And he really got into the nitty-gritty of what actually regenerative farming means. And I found this incredible, the mycelium. He called it the wood wide web. I don't think he's the one who coined that. I think it's been coined by someone else, but it is basically that network that is under the ground, that is the mycorrhizae. How do you pronounce that word again? Mycorrhizal network that basically are feeding from the photosynthesis of the plant, that is sending the nutrients down to the soil, and they're converting that, and they're feeding in return this sort of like the mycelium, and this mycelium is now connecting all the vines with the other vines, and they all have it in forest. They talk about like the network under the ground, and that resilience. This is also like, for example, under the earth is where they can actually sense when there's a threat, is because maybe there's a lack of this nutrient. So they are actually communicating, and that communication there's a word for it. It's called quorum, and I'm like, wow. All of a sudden I'm like, all these years I'm just talking about wine, talking about, okay, yeah, we talk about pruning, we talk about, and then there's all this like biological thing that's happening under, but also this philosophical happening under, that's like almost the pulsating heart of the planet. It is Mother Nature, and that is, gotta listen. We gotta stop and listen what's happening. Hence why I'm like pretty obsessed now with this regenerative movement. It's not a trend,
And I can see, especially with the challenges of climate change, that this type of new way of looking at farming and being smarter and being more effective is the way to break the status quo of just using traditional methods from when temperatures were a lot cooler.
Absolutely.
So I love your passion. So how can sommeliers, buyers and consumers support regenerative producers more meaningfully?
Well, let's start with sommeliers and buyers, because that's where we have, I guess, the real influence. One, stop treating regenerative farming as just a buzzword. Ask questions. I think ask if the vineyard practices polyculture. Do they use cover crops? Do animals graze between the vines? What's their approach to carbon, to compost, to fungicide? Regenerative farming isn't a certification, it's a philosophy and a practice. But if you know the right questions to ask, you'll find the right people. But in saying that, I don't want to also alienate the other producers that are working their ass off, actually trying to get to doing things more in a more regenerative way, because this can be quite alienating. So we do not want to be like also preaching here. The message, the communication, the conversation needs to start happening. And by that, then we start to educate and we start to really, I guess, like motivate people in making changes in the way that they farm. And for consumers, it can be hard to know where to look. There's no formal regenerative label on wine. Well, not yet, but you can learn to read between the lines. Follow the growers, read their vineyard journals for terms like biodiversity, no-till farming, compost teas, animal integration. Often these producers will share their values quite publicly, I think, on their Instagram feed or bottle copy. Also, I think more people ask about these wines at restaurants or bottle shop, the more visibility these producers will get. So I think more importantly, we need to probably shift the narrative from sacrifice to value. These wines aren't more expensive just because they're natural. They cost a lot more because they're extremely hard to achieve. They are labors of care. And I guess they're wines made with respect for future harvests, not just for this current vintage.
So let's talk about your experience curating wine lists for places like TFEHotels, Olivine and Embla. What defines a great wine list for you?
A great wine list is like a landscape. So for me, when you say what defines a great wine list, when I look at the TFEHotels, completely different venue. Also, I was a different time of my career when I did the wine list there. And then you have Olivine, that was also a few years later, and then Embla, all very different venues, all also very different in what I was projecting with the wine program, how much budget I was given, extremely important. And I guess what the message was with the TFEHotels, I had like these massive containers to curate. But the thing is, my ex-boss, he loved Burgundy. He loved Bordeaux. He actually, funnily enough, had like a really special place for wines of Savoie in all this wine region. So then for me, the strategy was to then curate these verticals of Petrus, but then I had to go look for Barolo, Champagne, all the other wine regions like in Spain, in Sicily, that he didn't really care about. So I guess defining a great wine list, you look for balance, you look for diversity, you want to have a bunch of wines that are into the $90 bottle, $100 to $150 bracket, $150 to $200 bracket. And within this, every bracket has to have something that almost everyone would like. So this is what really gives you a good wine list. It should have texture, depth, light, shadow. It's like a good photograph. It has to have also a sense of time. For me, it's also not about listing every grape under the sun. It's about creating a mood. For example, at the TFEHs, the brief was grandeur. Fine wine, global icons, depth across vintages. It was about making sure a guest could have a 1975 Bordeaux or a benchmark Burgundy alongside a top Australian producer. Whereas at Ambler, the energy was totally different. It was raw, it was immediate, almost punk leaning, if I may say. Wines with live texture, often made with minimal intervention, but then also going classic and more classic. Whereas at Olivine Wine Bar, which actually was really happy, got us the best new winelist of Australia. What we really did there, it was a way for me to write a love letter about everything I cared about, from grower champagne, Central and Eastern Europe, indigenous varieties, regenerative farming. And then we also commissioned a local artist to do maps and to do watercolor landmarks that I would just basically put across onto the wine list. So there was a visual element as well. That was actually, it felt like it was a book of wine that you could just then buy and drink and feel something. So yeah, that is how really you have such diversity in the way that you curate wine lists. You need to just have a message. It has to start with an intent. Where do you go? And from that source, from that point, you find this epicenter, and from there on, you can build on it.
As Melbourne's ambassador for the Star Wine List, how do you approach evaluating a venue's wine program?
For me, it's never just about how many big name bottles on the list. I approach it like I would, I guess, a piece of music. Is there rhythm? Is there tension? Is there contrast? Is there emotion? I think a great wine list should have identity. It has to either have identity of the owner, what the owner is trying to do, or identity with the chef, the food, or it really tells a story of whoever is writing the list. So it should reflect a voice, the venue, as I said, the food, the team, the energy. Is it bold? Is it eclectic? Is it classic? Is it quiet and precise? What I want to feel the intention behind the selections. I also look for curation over accumulation, because I'd rather see a 20 bottle list that's deeply thoughtful than a 100-page binder of trophies. There's one thing my ex-boss always used to say is I don't want a Coca-Cola wine list, because it's very easy to just buy the trophies and the big names. You get the allocations. You don't even have to think. You just buy the allocations. And now today's allocation is you have to buy all of these. You don't even get to choose. So then all of a sudden your wine has just become a smattering of whatever the allocations are. Where's the fun in that? Where is the craftsmanship? Where is the, I guess, creativity in that? So I think the best lists spark curiosity. They open a dialogue. They make you want to ask, what's that? Who made that? Why is it there? That's when a wine program stops being just a selection. It becomes a conversation.
So what I'm hearing is the Star Wine List is sort of like a Michelin star for winemakers. So following from that then, what trends are you seeing globally that you'd love to see more of here in Australia?
Globally, I'm seeing a growing reverence for, I guess, place over variety. And I love to see more of that here. In places like Austria, Georgia, and even parts of Italy, producers are leaning into local grapes and ancient techniques, not for nostalgia, but because they reflect identity. And wineries are following suit. They're becoming cultural expressions, if I can say that, not just commercial tools. I feel like there's an identity. What is the Australian identity? What are the grapes here? International grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon, like Chardonnay, we're doing really good job with these grape varieties, and now we actually have an identity of what is a Cabernet Sauvignon from Australia. You can take a Wendouree from Clare Valley to Bordeaux and you can be yep, this is our cultural identity. You can take a Pinot Noir from Bindi, or you take something from Byfar and you're this is what we're making here. And this is beautiful, but also what I would like to see is more alternative varieties and varieties that are growing in the region because they're resilient. When we see varieties like Picpoul, for example, that are still retaining acidity, but then it's later ripening. So they're actually working in global warming, into this changing planet, into the climatic adversary, the difficulties that we're getting with climate change. So when other countries, what they're doing is really following suit in terms of what is working for the environment, and whether it's hybrid varieties, whether it is, again, more of that knowing provenance and working ethically for, I guess, for the future. Also, what I would like to see more is wine lists that are more structured by mood and texture, maybe that storytelling, or think about not having a wine is about grape variety, but if you had it by region, you would already invite someone to take a journey. So if you were to, tell them what Mondeuse is, how would they know? But if you tell them, let me take you to the Alps and in the Swiss border of France, they already have an idea of where that is, or that might even spark in them, I guess they would want to travel, maybe there'd be a curiosity for where they would like to go next, whether it is Mount Etna in Sicily, it's Caricante. It is more about really writing wine lists by regional I'd like to see that. And I guess, again, I'd love to see more Australian lists spotlighting producers who are going beyond sustainability and telling those stories through staff training and guest engagement. Because the way that we farm is, I guess, for me, part of the wine's narrative now. It has to be. And I think we're just at the beginning of that. We're just beginning to realize how powerful that story can be.
That was awesome, Liinaa. Let's hope that some of those things do develop, global trends develop here in Australia, because we can always do better. But we're going to shift gears now. It's time for what I call half glass full. It's a rapid fire session to dig deep into the lighter side of wine life and a few quirky insights. Are you ready?
Sure, bring it on.
First wine that changed your life.
Barolo. But I do not remember the producer. I just remember he was a Barolo.
Last bottle that made you emotional?
I guess it was a white Domaine de la Grange des Pères.
A go-to snack with a glass of Chardonnay?
Actually, it's just like a pack of chips, really. Salt and vinegar chips when you finish service, and it's really comforting.
Most inspiring winemaker you've met?
I guess it's Anselme Selos from Domaine Jacques Selos.
A grape you think more people should fall in love with?
I guess Roussanne and Marsanne.
Favorite vineyard visit ever?
When I was at Sattlerhof in Styria.
Music that pairs best with tasting wine?
Classic. It has to be classic. Chopin, piano.
Your desert island wine book?
Wine book, I think it will have to be, I'm going to support my dear friend here in Australia, Max Allen, Alternative Varieties, because then you will be reminiscing of my time in Australia as well.
Winelist sin you can't forgive?
Winelist sin. When there's no coherence in the way that they list wines, there needs to be a coherence.
Regenerative farming in one word?
Future.
And what does hospitality mean to you?
Hospitality means it is a culture. It is a place of migration, human stories, discovery, and forming relationship. It's immediate, it's the instant gratification, it's pleasure, it's hedonism.
And I think that's a great place for us to finish today.
Amazing. That's been really fun. Thank you, Brent.
Yeah, Liinaa, thank you so much for sharing your story, your wisdom, and your vision for a more connected, conscious wine world.
Thank you, Brent. It's been really a great opportunity for me to be part of this podcast, and I'm looking forward to listening to everyone else.
Yes, and thanks to everyone for listening to Behind the Wines. Until next time, stay curious, drink well, and never forget to fill your glass with something meaningful. And that's a wrap for this episode of Behind the Wines. A huge thank you for joining us. Your support means everything. Like a good wine, the best stories are meant to be shared. So make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, leave a comment, and let us know your thoughts on our socials. And go to our website for some more stories, special offers, upcoming events, and exclusive content. And special thanks to PS Wine Selections for your ongoing support. Until next time, cheers.